Sometimes the most broken souls find each other in the most unexpected ways. An aging cowboy with nothing left but regrets and fading hope, and a dying mare who knows her time has come. Eli Boone had wandered the West for decades, carrying far more sorrow than silver. When a wounded mare appears at his fence one foggy morning, she does something that changes everything. She entrusts him with her newborn foal before quietly passing. The tiny creature becomes the reason a man who'd given up on life finds something worth living for again. But what incredible event would make this dying horse's final gift transform not just one broken man, but an entire forgotten town? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The high desert country outside of Redemption. Wyoming stretched out like a worn quilt, patched with sage and rimrock, threaded with arroyos that hadn't seen good water in years. Eli Boone's place sat at the edge of where the grassland gave up trying. A small parcel with a leaning barn, a three-rail fence that needed mending, and a cabin that had seen better decades. He'd bought it with the last of his savings 8 months back, not because it was much to look at, but because it was far enough from everything that mattered that he figured he could finally stop running. He was 63 years old, though his hands looked older and his eyes sometimes looked younger, depending on the light and what he was remembering. His hair had gone the color of winter wheat, and his face carried the deep lines of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs. He walked with a slight favor to his left leg, a gift from a horse that had gone sideways on him in Nevada, back when he still had people who cared whether he came home or not. The town of Redemption itself was small enough that you could stand at one end of Main Street and count every false front building without losing your place. Maybe 300 souls called it home, most of them getting by on ranching or the memory of better times. There was Gunderson's General Store, where old Henrik Gunderson still worked the counter despite his hands shaking so bad he had to use both of them to make change. There was the Silver Spur Saloon, run by a widow named Marlene Copper, who'd lost her husband to the mines up in Montana and decided she'd rather pour drinks than dig in the ground. Doc Hendricks kept an office above the barbershop, though mostly he treated livestock these days since people couldn't afford to get sick. Eli knew these people the way you know, faces you pass but don't quite speak to. He'd nod when he came to town for supplies, maybe exchange a word or two about the weather, but he kept his distance. He'd learned a long time ago that getting close to people just meant more hurt when things went wrong, and things always went wrong. His mornings started the same way they had for months. Up before dawn, coffee boiled black and strong in a dented pot that had traveled with him through 4 states. He'd stand on the porch, watching the sun crack the horizon, and wonder what exactly he was waiting for. Not death, exactly. He wasn't quite ready for that conversation. But not life, either. Not the way other men seemed to grab hold of it. Just existence, he supposed. Just breathing and moving and filling the hours until there weren't any more hours to fill. The cabin was sparse. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, though he never had company. A wood stove that worked when the wind was right. On the shelf above the stove sat his most precious possession, a silver pocket watch that had belonged to his father, etched with the initials JTB, for Jacob Thomas Boone. His father had been a railroad man, solid and dependable, the kind of person who showed up when he said he would and meant what he said. He'd given Eli the watch on his 18th birthday. The same day Eli had announced he was heading west to work cattle ranches instead of settling into a steady job back in Missouri. "Time's the only thing that's truly yours," his father had said, pressing the watch into Eli's palm. "Don't waste it on regrets." Eli had managed to waste it anyway. The watch still kept perfect time, which seemed like a cruel joke. He could track every minute of every hour of every day, and none of them added up to much. He'd worked ranches from Montana to Texas, been married once for 4 years to a woman named Sarah, who'd finally had enough of him disappearing for months at a time. No children. That was probably a mercy, though sometimes late at night he wondered what it might have been like to hear someone call him Dad. He had a brother somewhere, Thomas, 10 years younger, but they hadn't spoken in over a decade. Last Eli heard, Thomas had a family down in Colorado, doing something with computers that Eli couldn't begin to understand. The fence line needed walking, so Eli pulled on his boots, good leather ones that still had some life in them, and headed out into the cool morning. September in Wyoming meant the nights were starting to bite, and the grass had that golden look it got when summer was thinking about leaving. His breath misted in front of him as he walked, checking posts, looking for wire breaks, doing the small tasks that gave shape to empty days. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fog that was rolling down from the hills. The shape was wrong, too substantial, too low to the ground. But as he got closer, his heart started working harder. A horse, a mare by the look of her, standing just beyond his fence. And something else, something small and unsteady beside her. Eli stopped walking. The mare was buckskin, her coat dark with sweat and something else, soot maybe, or ash. Her eyes were wide, white showing all around, and she was trembling. One of her front legs was torn up bad, blood matting the hair, and there were burns along her flank, raw and weeping. But it was her eyes that got to him. They weren't wild with pain. They were focused, deliberate, looking right at him, with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Beside her, barely able to stand, was a foal. Couldn't have been more than a few hours old, still wet, still learning what its legs were for. It was a little bay, dark except for a white star on its forehead, and it was pushing at its mother's side, looking for milk, looking for comfort, looking for some assurance that the world wasn't as terrible as its first few hours suggested. The mare took a step forward, right up to the fence, and made a sound Eli had never heard a horse make before. It wasn't a whinny or a nicker. It was something deeper, something that came from the chest, and it sounded for all the world like grief. Like goodbye, Eli found himself walking forward without deciding to. His hands went to the fence rail, and the mare stretched her neck over, lowering her head until it was almost touching his chest. She stood there, breathing hard, and he could feel the heat coming off her, could smell the smoke and fear and exhaustion. Up close, he could see that her injuries were worse than he'd thought. The leg might have been broken. The burns were deep. She was dying, and she knew it. Easy now, Eli heard himself say, his voice rough from disuse. Easy, girl. The mare lifted her head and turned it toward the foal, then back to Eli. She did it again, and the meaning was so clear it didn't need words. She was asking. No, she was entrusting. This small, fragile life that had just barely started, she was giving it to him. Eli had seen a lot of things in his 63 years, but he'd never seen anything quite like this. Animals didn't do this. Horses didn't do this. But here she was, doing it anyway, and he felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he'd kept locked up for so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. I'll take care of him, Eli said. And he didn't know if he was talking to the mare or to himself or to whatever force in the universe had brought this moment to his fence line. I promise you that. The mare seemed to understand. She let out a long breath, and some of the tension went out of her body. Then very carefully, very deliberately, she turned and nuzzled the foal, pushing it toward the fence, toward Eli. The little creature stumbled, caught itself, and looked up at him with eyes that were dark and clear, and full of something that might have been trust, if it had known enough about the world to be cautious. Eli didn't think. He just moved. He climbed over the fence, his left leg complaining but doing its job, and scooped the foal up in his arms. It was heavier than it looked, all awkward legs and damp warmth, and it made a small sound of confusion, but didn't struggle. Eli carried it back over the fence, set it down gently on his side, and turned back to the mare. She was already lying down. She'd made it to the ground with more grace than he would have expected, and now she was on her side, her breathing shallow, her eyes starting to cloud. Eli climbed back over the fence and knelt beside her. He put his hand on her neck, feeling the powerful muscles, the heat, the life that was slipping away faster than morning fog. You're a good mother, he told her, his throat tight. The best kind. The mare looked at him one more time. Then she closed her eyes, let out one final breath, and went still. Eli stayed there for a long time, his hand on her neck, feeling the warmth gradually fade. The sun was fully up now, burning off the fog, and somewhere overhead a hawk cried out. Behind him, on the other side of the fence, he could hear the foal moving, making small sounds of distress, calling for the mother that wouldn't answer. Finally, Eli stood. His knees cracked, his leg ached, and his eyes were burning in a way that had nothing to do with the smoke smell still clinging to the air. He walked back to the fence, climbed over one more time, and looked down at the small creature that was now his responsibility. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like it's just you and me now." The foal looked up at him, and in that moment, Eli Boone, who had spent years running from connection, from responsibility, from anything that might require him to care about something other than his own survival, felt the weight of another life settle onto his shoulders. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was the first thing that had felt like purpose in longer than he could remember. Eli had no idea what to do with the newborn foal. That was the first clear thought that cut through the fog of everything else he was feeling. He'd worked around horses his whole life, broken them, trained them, doctored them when they got hurt, but he'd never raised one from birth. That was specialized work, the kind of thing people planned for, prepared for, did with proper facilities and knowledge and supplies. All he had was a leaning barn and a promise made to a dying horse. The foal was crying now, a high, desperate sound that cut through the morning quiet. It was looking for its mother, looking for milk, looking for the warmth and comfort that nature said should be there, but wasn't. Eli stood there for a moment, paralyzed by the enormity of what he'd taken on, and then something in him shifted. The same thing that had made him climb that fence in the first place, maybe. The part of him that had been sleeping for years, but was apparently still capable of waking up when something needed it badly enough. "All right," he said, more to himself than the foal. "First things first." He bent down, his back protesting, and gathered the foal back into his arms. It was stronger now than it had been even an hour ago, struggling a bit, but Eli held firm and carried it toward the barn. The structure wasn't much, but it was dry and out of the wind, and there was an empty stall he'd been using to store old tack. He kicked the door open, cleared out the tack with one arm while holding the foal with the other, and laid down fresh straw from the pile he kept in the corner. The foal stumbled when he set it down, found its feet again, and immediately started searching. It nosed at Eli's hand, his shirt, his leg, looking for something to nurse from, and Eli felt his heart crack a little further. The creature was starving and frightened and alone, and he was all it had. He needed help. Pride wasn't going to feed this animal. Eli left the foal in the stall. It called after him in that heartbreaking way and went to the cabin. He didn't have a telephone, but he had his truck, an old Ford that ran more on faith than mechanics. He climbed in, turned the key, and after some consideration the engine caught. 15 minutes later, he was pulling up in front of Gunderson's general store. Henrik Gunderson looked up from his counter when Eli walked in, surprise crossing his weathered face. Eli wasn't a regular, just came in when he absolutely had to, and this was twice in 1 week. "Morning, Eli," Henrik said, his voice carrying the slight accent of his Danish parents. "What brings you in?" "Need milk replacer," Eli said without preamble. "For a foal, newborn, and bottles if you have them." Henrik's eyebrows went up. "Didn't know you were breeding horses." "I'm not. Found one this morning, orphaned." The old storekeeper studied him for a moment, then nodded and moved toward the back of the store where he kept ranch supplies. His hands shook as he pulled down a large container of milk replacer powder, then rummaged through a box until he found nursing bottles designed for livestock. He set everything on the counter. "You know how to mix this?" Henrik asked. "I'll figure it out. Instructions are on the side. Warm water, not hot. For that young will need to eat every 2 to 3 hours round the clock." Henrik paused, then added more gently, "It's a lot of work. Eli, especially alone." "I know. There's a vet over in Laramie. Can't afford a vet right now." "I'll manage." Henrik rang up the supplies and Eli counted out bills from his worn wallet. The money was more than he liked to spend, but there wasn't a choice. As he gathered his purchases, Henrik cleared his throat. "Mare that died, where'd she come from?" "Don't know. She was burned pretty bad. Might have come down from the hills. Heard there were some fires up that way last week." Henrik nodded slowly. "Thompson Ranch is up there. Big operation. They might be missing stock. I'll ask around," Eli said, though part of him already knew he wouldn't. If someone had lost this mare, if someone came looking for her foal, he'd have to give it up. And something in him was already rebelling against that idea. The mare had chosen him. That had to mean something. He drove back faster than the old truck liked, his mind already racing ahead to the work waiting for him. When he pulled up to the barn, he could hear the foal crying before he even turned off the engine. Inside, the small creature was pacing the stall as much as its unsteady legs would allow, calling and calling for a mother who would never come. Eli set to work. He read the instructions on the milk replacer 3 times to make sure he had it right, then heated water on his camp stove, not too hot like Henrik said, and mixed the powder until it dissolved. He filled one of the bottles, tested the temperature on his wrist the way he'd seen mothers do with babies, and carried it into the stall. The foal smelled the milk immediately. It lurched toward him, all instinct and desperation, and tried to nurse from the bottle. But it didn't know how. It pushed at the bottle, knocked it with its nose, got frustrated and stepped back, crying harder. Eli sat down in the straw, his old bones settling in for what he suspected would be a long process. He coaxed the foal closer, held the bottle steady, and tried to get the nipple into its mouth. The foal fought him at first, didn't understand, wanted its mother's warmth and familiar shape. Eli kept at it, patient in a way he didn't know he still could be, and finally, the foal latched on. The change was immediate. The small body stopped trembling quite so hard. The desperate cries quieted. The foal nursed hard, pulling at the bottle with the single-minded intensity of the truly hungry, and Eli found himself smiling for the first time in months. "Maybe longer, that's it," he murmured. "That's the way." The foal drained the bottle faster than Eli expected, and when it was empty, it looked up at him with milk on its muzzle, and something that might have been contentment in its dark eyes. Then its legs buckled, the excitement and relief too much for its newborn strength, and it folded down into the straw. Within moments it was asleep, breathing deep and even, its small body warm against Eli's leg. Eli sat there in the quiet barn, looking down at the sleeping foal, and felt the weight of what he'd taken on settle more fully onto his shoulders. Every 2 to 3 hours, Henrik had said, round the clock. That meant no full nights of sleep. No leaving for more than a couple hours at a time. No walking away if it got too hard. He thought about his father's watch, sitting on the shelf in the cabin. "Time's the only thing that's truly yours. Don't waste it on regrets. Maybe this wasn't wasting it. Maybe this was the opposite of wasting it. Maybe this was the first time in decades he'd spent his time on something that actually mattered." The foal stirred in its sleep, made a small sound, and Eli carefully shifted so it could rest more comfortably. His leg was going numb, but he didn't move. He'd sit here as long as the small creature needed him to. That was the promise, after all. That was what he'd told the mare. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and Eli Boone, 63 years old, broke alone, and utterly unprepared, became a father to something that needed him in a way nothing had needed him in years. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was the best thing that had happened to him in longer than he could remember. When the foal woke an hour later, Eli was ready with another bottle. This time it latched on faster, nursed more calmly, and when it was done, it nuzzled his hand in a way that made his throat tight. He'd need a name for the creature, something that fit, something that matched the strange grace of how it had come into his life. He thought about the mare's final act, the trust she'd shown, the gift she'd given him when she could have just as easily died alone in those hills. "Lucky," Eli said quietly. "I'll call you Lucky, because that's what you are. That's what we both are." The foal, Lucky, looked at him with those clear, dark eyes, and Eli could swear there was understanding there. Could swear the small creature knew it was home. The first 3 days tested every ounce of determination Eli had. Sleep became something he did in snatches, stolen between feedings that came every 2 hours like clockwork. He'd set his father's pocket watch beside his bed and wake to its alarm, stumbling through the dark cabin to heat water and mix formula, then trudge out to the barn where Lucky would be waiting, crying out the moment he heard Eli's footsteps. On the fourth morning, Eli stood at his stove, waiting for water to boil, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd drunk his own coffee while it was still hot. The dented pot sat there, forgotten and cold, while he attended to a creature that couldn't wait, wouldn't understand delay, needed him with an urgency that left no room for his own comfort. He should have been exhausted. He should have been resentful. Instead, he found himself smiling as he mixed the formula, anticipating the way Lucky would nicker when he entered the barn, the way the foal would rush toward him with increasing steadiness, the way it would nurse and then stand close, sometimes resting its head against his chest as if to say thank you. The routine was changing him in ways he hadn't expected. His days had structure now, purpose beyond just filling hours. He woke with a reason. He planned ahead. He found himself thinking about the future, Lucky's future, in a way he hadn't thought about anything in years. But there were complications he hadn't anticipated. On the fifth day, as Eli was walking back from the barn after the morning feeding, he saw a truck coming up his drive. A newer model, clean, with Thompson Ranch painted on the door. His stomach tightened. Henrik had mentioned the Thompsons. Big operation up in the hills. Might be missing stock. The truck pulled to a stop and a man climbed out. Mid-40s, built solid, wearing a clean denim shirt and a Stetson that had probably cost more than Eli's entire truck. His face was tanned and pleasant, the face of someone used to dealing with people, used to getting his way through charm rather than force. "Morning," the man called out, friendly enough. "You must be Boone. I'm Jack Thompson. Owned the spread up north." Eli wiped his hands on his jeans, suddenly aware of how he must look, unshaven, clothes worn, years of hard living written across his face. "Morning. What can I do for you? Heard you might have found one of my horses. Mare Buckskin, probably injured. Henrik Gunderson mentioned you'd come in looking for foal supplies." There it was, the thing Eli had been dreading. He chose his words carefully. "Found a mare. She was hurt bad, burns, broken leg maybe." "She didn't make it." Thompson's face shifted, genuine regret crossing it. "That's unfortunate. She was a good horse. Valuable bloodline. We had a fire tear through the north pasture last week. Lost some fence, scattered the herd. Been rounding them up since." He paused, then added, "She have a foal with her." Eli felt something protective rise in his chest, something fierce and uncompromising. "She did. I'll need to take it back with me. That foal represents a significant investment. The mare's sire was a champion cutting horse, cost me $20,000 to breed her. The foal could be worth—" "No." Thompson stopped mid-sentence, surprise crossing his face. "Excuse me. The mare came to me. She was dying, and she knew it. She gave me her foal before she passed. That means something. I understand this might feel personal," Thompson said, his tone patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "But legally, that foal is my property. The mare was my horse, which makes the offspring mine as well. Now, I'm a reasonable man. I'll reimburse you for any expenses you've incurred, and I appreciate you taking care of the animal. But I need to take it back to my ranch, where it can be properly cared for." "It's being properly cared for." Thompson's jaw tightened slightly. "Mr. Boone, I have veterinary staff, proper facilities, other mares that could nurse it. What you're doing here, feeding it from bottles, keeping it in that old barn, that's admirable, but it's not sustainable. That foal needs professional care. That foal needs someone who gives a damn whether it lives or dies. The mare didn't trust you to do that. She came to me. Horses don't make choices like that. She was injured, disoriented. She made a choice," Eli said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I looked into her eyes. She chose me. And I made her a promise." Thompson studied him for a long moment, and Eli could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The rancher was used to getting what he wanted, but he was also smart enough to know when pushing harder might backfire. Finally, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card. "Keep this," Thompson said. "When you realize you can't handle it, and you will, Mr. Boone, raising a foal alone is near impossible, you call me. I'll come get the animal, and we'll settle up fairly. But understand this, that foal is valuable, and if something happens to it because of inadequate care, there could be legal ramifications." Eli took the card but didn't look at it. "Nothing's going to happen to it." Thompson nodded, but his expression said he didn't believe it. He climbed back into his truck, and Eli watched him drive away, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle onto him. Legal ramifications, professional care, valuable investment. All the ways the world could take Lucky away from him if he wasn't careful. He walked back to the barn, where Lucky was standing at the stall door, ears pricked forward, watching. The foal nickered when it saw him, that small sound of recognition and welcome, and Eli felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. "Nobody's taking you," he told Lucky quietly. "I don't care what fancy bloodlines you've got or how much you're worth. That mare trusted me with you, and I'm not giving you up." Lucky stepped forward and nuzzled his hand, and Eli stroked the soft neck, feeling the warm, living reality of this creature that had come into his life and changed everything. Thompson was right about one thing. Raising a foal alone was near impossible. But Eli had done impossible things before. He'd survived wars and loss and years of wandering without purpose. This was different. This was something worth fighting for. That afternoon, Eli drove back to town. Not to Gunderson's this time, but to the small office Doc Hendricks kept above the barber shop. The doc was in reading a veterinary journal and looked up when Eli knocked. "Eli Boone," Doc said, surprise in his voice. "Don't think I've seen you since you moved out there." "Everything all right?" "Need some advice," Eli said. "About raising a foal, orphaned, week-old now." Doc Hendricks leaned back in his chair, interest sparking in his eyes. He was in his 70s, still sharp, still passionate about animals, even though most of his practice these days was cattle and horses rather than people. "Tell me about it." Eli told him everything. The mare appearing at his fence, her injuries, the way she'd entrusted him with Lucky Thompson's visit that morning. Doc listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and when Eli finished, the old veterinarian was quiet for a moment. "That mare made a choice," Doc finally said. "Animals know things we don't. They sense character in ways we've forgotten how to. If she trusted you with her foal, that means something. That's what I told Thompson. Jack Thompson's not a bad man, but he sees horses as assets. Dollar signs. You're seeing that foal as something that needs you. That's the difference." Doc stood and went to his filing cabinet, pulling out some papers. "I'm going to give you some information. Feeding schedules, what to watch for health-wise, how to start transitioning to solid food. You come see me if you have questions or concerns. I won't charge you. This is for the horse's sake." Eli felt something in his chest ease slightly. "I appreciate that, Doc." "And Eli?" Doc looked at him directly. "Having something to care for, something that depends on you, it's good for a man. Gives him reason to keep going when things get hard. Don't let Thompson or anyone else make you feel like you're not capable of this. You are." Eli left the office with papers in hand, and something else he hadn't expected, validation. Someone else saw what he saw. Someone else understood why this mattered. Word spread the way it does in small towns, quietly at first, then gathering speed like water finding its natural course. Eli Boone, the hermit who'd barely spoken to anyone since moving to the edge of redemption, had taken in an orphaned foal, was raising it himself, feeding it every few hours, like a newborn child. Some folks thought it was admirable. Others thought he'd lost his mind. Eli didn't care much either way. He was too busy trying to keep Lucky alive and healthy to worry about what people thought. But the town had started noticing him in ways it hadn't before, and that brought its own complications. It started with Marlene Copper from the Silver Spur. She showed up one afternoon in her old station wagon, parking in front of Eli's cabin like she'd been invited. Eli watched from the barn as she climbed out, carrying a covered dish. "Brought you some stew?" she called out, spotting him. "Figured you might not have time to cook proper meals, what with a foal to tend." Eli walked over slowly, not quite sure what to make of this. Marlene was in her late 50s, handsome in a weathered way. With steel-grey hair, she kept pulled back and eyes that had seen their share of hardship but hadn't gone bitter with it. "That's kind of you," Eli said, taking the dish. "Didn't have to do that." "No, I didn't," Marlene agreed. "But Doc Hendricks mentioned what you're doing, and I thought, well, I remember what it's like when you're caring for something helpless. Lost my husband 20 years back, but we had a daughter. Raised her mostly on my own. Know how it feels to be running on fumes and determination?" Eli didn't know what to say to that. Marlene didn't seem to need a response. She glanced toward the barn. "Mind if I see the foal?" Been hearing about it all over town. They walked to the barn together, and when Marlene saw Lucky, her face softened in a way that made her look younger. The foal had grown stronger in the past week, was standing steadier, moving with more confidence. It came to the stall door when it saw Eli, nickering and greeting. "Oh, he's beautiful," Marlene said quietly. "Look at that star on his forehead. Like someone marked him as special." "She did," Eli said. "His mother did." Lucky investigated Marlene with careful curiosity, sniffing her hand, and she laughed, a warm sound that seemed too big for the dusty barn. "You're doing good work here, Eli. Don't let anyone tell you different." After she left, Eli stood in his cabin holding the warm dish of stew and feeling something he couldn't quite name. Connection, maybe. The sense that he wasn't quite as alone as he'd been. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. 2 days later, Henrik Gunderson came by. Not to deliver anything, just to check in. He brought sugar cubes. "For when the foal's old enough," he explained, and spent an hour sitting on Eli's porch, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the town council meeting, how his grandson was starting college in the spring. Normal things, the kind of conversation Eli hadn't had in years because he'd stopped letting people get close enough to have them. "Getting quieter out here as winter comes on," Henrik observed, his hands resting on his knees. "Must get lonely sometimes." "Used to it," Eli said. "Being used to something doesn't make it good." Henrik was quiet for a moment, then added, "My wife passed 8 years ago. Cancer. After she was gone, I almost sold the store, moved away. Figured there wasn't much point staying. Then I realized the store wasn't just a business. It was a place people came. Place they needed. Gave me purpose to keep it running. Sometimes purpose finds you in unexpected ways." Eli thought about Lucky, sleeping in the barn, depending on him for everything. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Sometimes it does." As Henrik was leaving, he paused by his truck. "You need anything? Supplies, help, someone to watch the foal if you have to go somewhere. You let me know. You're not on your own with this, Eli, not anymore." That night, after Lucky's 10 o'clock feeding, Eli sat on his porch with his cold coffee, reheated 3 times, and finally given up on, and tried to understand what was happening. He'd come here to be alone, to finish out his time without complications or connections or anything that might require him to care about the outcome. And now he had a foal that needed him every few hours, townspeople showing up with food and conversation, offers of help he didn't know how to accept. Lucky had done this. One small creature, and suddenly Eli was part of the world again in ways he hadn't been in decades. The complications multiplied. A week later, a woman named Sarah Chen stopped by. She was younger than most of the town, maybe 40, and she taught at the small school that served the surrounding ranches. She'd heard about Lucky and wanted to know if she could bring her students out to see him. It would be educational, she explained, standing at Eli's fence line. Most of these kids grow up around livestock, but they don't often get to see something this young. And honestly, it might be good for them to see someone caring for an animal with this much dedication. That's a lesson that matters. Eli's first instinct was to say no. His place wasn't set up for visitors. He wasn't good with people, especially not children. But then he thought about Lucky, how the foal was growing stronger every day, how it had started playing in its stall, bucking and kicking in pure joy at being alive. Maybe it would be good for Lucky to get used to people. Maybe it would be good for Eli to remember there was a world beyond this small piece of land. "All right," he heard himself say. "But they have to be quiet. No sudden movements. Foals spook easy." Sarah's face lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Boone. This means a lot." The following Tuesday, a small bus pulled up his drive. 15 children between 7 and 12 climbed out, followed by Sarah and another teacher. They were well behaved, quieter than Eli expected, and their faces, when they saw Lucky, were full of wonder that reminded him how special this really was. He'd stopped seeing the miracle of it somewhere between the exhaustion and the routine. But watching these children, their careful approach, their gentle touches, the way they asked questions with genuine curiosity, he remembered. Lucky wasn't just a foal. Lucky was a life that shouldn't have survived, wouldn't have survived if the mare hadn't made that impossible journey to his fence. And now here he was, healthy and growing stronger every day, touching something in these children they might carry with them for years. One little girl, maybe 8 years old, looked up at Eli with serious eyes. "You saved him," she said. "That makes you a hero." Eli shook his head. "His mother saved him. She just trusted me to help. But you did help," the girl insisted. "That still counts." After the children left, Sarah stayed behind for a moment. "Thank you again," she said. "And Mr. Boone, if you ever need anything, the community's here. We take care of our own. I'm not—" Eli started to say he wasn't really part of the community, wasn't really one of their own. But Sarah cut him off gently. "You are now. Whether you wanted to be or not, you are now." That night, as Eli fed Lucky his late feeding, he thought about what Sarah had said. "You are now." He'd spent so many years running from being part of anything, and here he was, rooted to this place by nothing more than a promise to a dying horse. But that promise had somehow woven him into the fabric of this town in ways he hadn't intended and couldn't quite undo. Lucky finished his bottle and nuzzled against Eli's shoulder, that gesture of trust and affection that never failed to crack something open in Eli's chest. He stroked the foal's neck, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat, and admitted to himself what he'd been trying to deny. He didn't want to undo it. He didn't want to go back to being alone, to just filling time until there was no more time to fill. This, standing in a drafty barn at midnight with a foal that depended on him, being part of a community that had claimed him without permission. This was life, real life. The kind his father had wanted for him when he'd given him that watch and told him not to waste time on regrets. "We're going to be all right," Eli told Lucky quietly. "Both of us. We're going to figure this out." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Eli Boone actually believed it. 3 weeks after Lucky came into his life, Eli found a letter in his mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope made his hands go still. His brother's handwriting, precise and careful, unchanged in the decades since they'd last spoken. For a long moment, Eli just stood there at the end of his driveway, holding the envelope like it might bite. He carried it back to the cabin unopened, set it on the table, and went to tend to Lucky. The foal was thriving now, had graduated from round-the-clock feedings to something more manageable. 4 times a day, and Lucky was starting to supplement with hay and grain. The change had given Eli his sleep back, or most of it, and with that came the energy to think about things beyond immediate survival. Things like family, things like the choices that had brought him to this lonely piece of land at the edge of nowhere. After Lucky's morning feeding, Eli finally opened the letter. His brother's words were careful, measured, much like Thomas himself had always been. "Eli, I heard from Henrik Gunderson that you're living near redemption. He's an old friend of Dad's, still sends Christmas cards. He mentioned what you're doing with the foal. It sounds like you. Always did have a soft spot for things that needed help, even when you pretended you didn't. I've thought about reaching out for years, but never knew what to say. Maybe I still don't. Sarah and I have been married 22 years now. We have 3 kids. Oldest is 19 in college. Middle one's 16, youngest is 12. They've asked about you. I've told them what I remember, but that's not much anymore. We don't live far from you, relatively speaking. Colorado Springs. 4 hours, maybe. If you wanted to meet them, meet Sarah. I think that would be good. For all of us. No pressure. Just an open door if you want to walk through it. Thomas." Eli read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with his father's watch. The past, reaching out to him, offering connection, asking him to be part of something again. A month ago, he would have thrown the letter away, or maybe burned it, unwilling to face the weight of family and expectation, and all the ways he'd failed to be the kind of brother his father would have wanted him to be. But that was before Lucky, before a dying mare had entrusted him with something precious and shown him he was still capable of caring for more than just himself. That afternoon, Doc Hendricks stopped by for a checkup on Lucky. The old veterinarian had made it a habit to come every week, refusing payment, just wanting to make sure the foal was developing properly. He examined Lucky with gentle, practiced hands, checking teeth, listening to heart and lungs, watching how the young horse moved. "He's doing remarkably well," Doc said, straightening up with a slight grunt. "Better than I'd have expected for a bottle-fed foal." "You've done good work, Eli." "Had good help," Eli said. "You, Marlene, bringing food, Henrik making sure I have supplies." Doc smiled. "Community's a funny thing. Sometimes you don't know you're part of one until you need it, or until it needs you." He paused, studying Eli. "You look troubled, though. Something on your mind?" Eli hadn't planned to talk about it, but the words came anyway. "Got a letter from my brother. Haven't spoken to him in 10 years. He wants to reconnect, wants me to meet his family, and that scares you. I don't know what to say to him. Don't know how to be around family anymore. Spent too long alone?" Doc leaned against the stall door, thoughtful. "You know what I learned in all my years? The hardest part of healing isn't the physical part. It's letting yourself be vulnerable again after you've been hurt. That foal there," he nodded toward Lucky, who was nosing at some hay. "He was vulnerable from the moment he was born. Had to trust you completely or die. And you had to let yourself care about him, knowing you might lose him, knowing it would hurt if you did. But you did it anyway. That's different, is it? Seems to me it's the same courage, just pointed in a different direction. You let yourself care about that foal, knowing the risks. Maybe it's time to let yourself care about family again, knowing those risks too." After Doc left, Eli stood in the barn, watching Lucky explore his stall with growing confidence. The foal had started showing personality, curious about everything, brave in small doses, playful when he felt safe. And Eli had started noticing things about himself too. The way he talked to Lucky, his voice softer than it had been in years. The way he found himself planning for the future. Lucky would need training, would need more space to run, would need things Eli wasn't sure he could provide on his limited budget. That evening, Eli did something he hadn't done in years. He sat down with a piece of paper and a pen and wrote a letter. "Thomas, got yours today. Good to hear from you. Things here are different than they were. I've got responsibilities now. A foal to raise. It's teaching me things I thought I'd forgotten. About caring for something beyond yourself. About letting people help when you need it. I'd like to meet your family. Meet Sarah. See who you became in the years we weren't talking. But I need to be honest, I don't know how to be a good brother or uncle. Don't know if I ever did. All I can promise is I'll try. If that's enough, let me know when would be good for a visit. Eli." He sealed the letter before he could second-guess himself and set it aside to mail the next day. Then he went out to check on Lucky one more time before bed. The foal was lying in the straw, drowsy but alert, and lifted his head when Eli entered. "Got myself in deeper today," Eli told Lucky, settling down beside him. "Might be seeing family soon. My brother, his wife, their kids, your nieces and nephews, if we're being technical about it." Lucky's response was to rest his head on Eli's leg, a gesture of trust and affection that still amazed Eli every time it happened. He stroked the soft coat, feeling the steady breathing, and thought about Doc's words. The hardest part of healing is letting yourself be vulnerable again. For decades, Eli had protected himself by not letting anyone get close. Not after Sarah left. Not after his father died, and he and Thomas had their falling out over things that seemed important then, but felt petty now. He'd convinced himself that being alone was easier, safer, less painful in the long run, but Lucky had shown him something different. Vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the price of connection, of caring, of having something in your life that mattered more than your own comfort. And maybe the pain that came with caring, the fear of loss, the weight of responsibility, the risk of failure, maybe that was better than the hollow emptiness of a life lived at a safe distance from everything that made it worth living. The next morning, Eli took Lucky outside for the first time. The foal was old enough now, strong enough, and needed more space than the stall provided. He opened the stall door and led Lucky into the barn aisle, then toward the large door that opened onto the corral. Lucky stopped at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. The world beyond the barn was vast and bright and full of things he'd never experienced. Eli stood beside him, patient, letting the foal process this new reality at his own pace. "It's all right," Eli said quietly. "I've got you. Nothing out here's going to hurt you while I'm around." Lucky took a tentative step, then another. Then suddenly he was through the door, and the morning sun hit his coat, and he seemed to realize all at once how big the world was. He took off at a wobbly run, bucking and kicking, celebrating the simple joy of space and freedom and being alive. Eli watched him, and something in his chest expanded in a way that was almost painful. This was what the mare had wanted, for her foal to have a chance at life, to run and play and grow strong. And Eli had given him that, was continuing to give him that. The responsibility felt enormous, but it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in longer than he could remember. Marlene stopped by that afternoon and found Eli sitting on his porch, watching Lucky explore the corral. "Heard you got a letter from your brother," she said, settling into the chair beside him without invitation. Small towns being what they were, the mailman apparently talked. "Yeah, you going to answer it?" "Already did," Marlene nodded, satisfied. "Oh, good. Family's complicated, but it's worth the trouble, mostly." She was quiet for a moment, watching Lucky. "My daughter lives in Seattle now. Architect. Doesn't make it back often. When she does, we dance around all the things we should say and don't. I keep thinking one of these days I'll figure out how to bridge that gap. How to tell her I'm proud of her without making it sound like I wasn't proud before. How to admit I was scared every day she was growing up that I'd mess it up raising her alone. Did you mess it up? She turned out good. So maybe not as much as I feared." Marlene looked at him. "Point is, Eli, family's hard. But having Lucky there, watching you care for him, seeing you let yourself need help from the town, it's changing you, making you softer in the good ways. Your brother might need to see that. Might need to know you're not the same person you were when you stopped talking. I'm not sure I'm that different. You're sitting here having a conversation with me instead of grunting and walking away. That's different." Marlene stood, preparing to leave. "Give family a chance. That's all any of us can do." After she left, Eli sat alone, watching the sun sink lower, watching Lucky settle down for the evening. The foal had run himself, tired, and was now standing in the corral, drowsy and content, occasionally looking toward the barn where Eli sat, checking, making sure his person was still there. His person. That's what Eli had become. Not just a caretaker or a temporary guardian, but the center of this small creature's world. The one Lucky trusted completely, depended on absolutely, loved without reservation. It was terrifying. It was humbling. And it was teaching Eli something he'd forgotten in all his years of running, that being needed wasn't a burden. It was a gift. October brought the first real cold, the kind that settled into your bones and reminded you winter was coming whether you were ready or not. Eli spent a day insulating the barn, hanging old blankets over the drafty spots, making sure Lucky would stay warm when the temperatures really dropped. The foal was nearly 6 weeks old now, growing fast, already showing hints of the horse he'd become. Strong legs, good bone structure, that star on his forehead catching the light like a promise. Thomas's response came on a Tuesday. Brief and to the point, come for Thanksgiving. Sarah's already planning. The kids are excited. I am too. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Eli looked at the letter, looked at Lucky in the corral, and felt the old fear rise up. What if he went to Colorado Springs and realized he didn't fit anywhere anymore? What if his nieces and nephews looked at him and saw nothing but a failure, a man who'd wasted most of his life wandering? What if Thomas had built a good life, a complete life, and Eli's presence just reminded everyone of everything Eli wasn't? Lucky trotted over to the fence where Eli stood, nickering for attention. Eli scratched behind his ears, and the foal leaned into the touch, trusting and content. 6 weeks ago, Eli had been ready to let life just happen to him. Now he was worrying about Thanksgiving dinner with family he hadn't seen in a decade. "When did I start caring again?" he asked Lucky quietly. The foal just looked at him with those dark, clear eyes, as if the answer was obvious. "When you decided to, when you climbed that fence and made a promise, when you chose to let yourself matter to something." That afternoon, Jack Thompson returned. He pulled up in the same clean truck, climbed out wearing the same confident smile, but this time there was something else in his expression. Calculation mixed with concern. "Mr. Boone," he greeted. "Thought I'd check in. See how that foal's doing." "Doing fine," Eli said, not moving from his position on the porch. "Mind if I take a look? Just want to make sure he's developing properly. That bloodline's valuable. Any health issues now could affect his future worth." Eli considered refusing, but Doc Hendricks had taught him that transparency often worked better than defensiveness. "All right, but I'm coming with you." They walked to the corral together. Lucky was playing, running circles, practicing the movement that would eventually become a true gallop. He looked healthy, his coat gleaming, his body filling out nicely. Thompson watched for a long moment, and Eli could see surprise cross his face. "I'll be damned," Thompson said quietly. "He actually looks good. Better than good. He looks healthy and well-adjusted. How often are you feeding him now?" 4 times a day. He's on grain and hay too, transitioning off the bottle. And you're doing this alone. No hired help. Got help from the town. Doc Hendricks has been checking on him. Marlene Copper brings food, so I have time to focus on Lucky. Henrik Gunderson makes sure I have supplies. It's not just me. Thompson was quiet for a moment, watching Lucky. "I underestimated you," he finally said. "I thought you'd give up after a week, call me to come get him. Thought you'd realize it was too much work for too little return." He turned to face Eli directly. "But I'm still going to ask you to consider selling him to me. Not because you're failing, clearly you're not, but because this foal has potential. With proper training, proper breeding when he's old enough, he could be worth significant money. Money I'm guessing you could use. I don't want to sell him. I'd pay fair market value." "More than fair. Say 15,000. That's more than you spent on this land, probably. You could use that money to fix up your place, maybe buy more land, set yourself up better. And Lucky would have the kind of life his bloodline deserves. Professional training, good pasture, eventually a place in a breeding program that would ensure his legacy. $15,000. It was more money than Eli had seen in years. It was security, breathing room, the difference between struggling and managing. For a moment, just a moment, he let himself consider it. What he could do with that money. How it could change things. Then Lucky trotted over to the fence, drawn by their voices, and pushed his nose into Eli's hand. That simple gesture of trust and affection, done without thought because it was natural to him now, because Eli was his person, and that's what you did when your person was near. "No," Eli said. "The answer's still no." Thompson's jaw tightened. "You're being short-sighted. That foal needs someone who loves him more than he's worth in dollars. His mother knew that. That's why she brought him to me. His mother was a dying animal, making random choices. Nothing about that choice was random." Eli's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. "She had time to go anywhere. Could have stayed in the hills, died where she was, but she made it to my fence. She looked into my eyes and trusted me with the most precious thing she had. I'm not going to dishonor that trust by treating her foal like a commodity." Thompson studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're a fool, Boone. That foal represents opportunity, and you're throwing it away for what? Sentiment. For a promise. For doing right by something that depends on me. If that makes me a fool, I'll live with it." After Thompson left, angry this time, not just calculating, Eli sat on his porch and watched Lucky graze in the corral. $15,000. A life-changing amount of money. And he'd turned it down without serious hesitation. A month ago, he would have called that insanity. Now it just felt right. That evening, Henrik Gunderson stopped by with more supplies and found Eli sitting in the same spot. Lost in thought, saw Thompson's truck leaving, Henrik said, settling into the other chair. He make another offer? 15,000, Henrik whistled low. That's serious money. I know, but you said no. I did. Henrik nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. My grandfather came from Denmark with nothing but the clothes on his back and a pocket full of hope. Built the store from the ground up. When I was young, a developer offered him 3 times what the store was worth. Wanted to tear it down, put up something modern. My grandfather refused. The developer called him a fool. Said he was letting sentiment get in the way of good business. What did your grandfather say? He said some things are worth more than their price. Said the store wasn't just a building. It was a promise he'd made to himself, to his family, to the community. That breaking that promise for money would cost him more than any amount of cash could replace. Henrik looked at Eli. You made a promise to that mare. Lucky's depending on you. The town's watching you become part of something bigger than yourself. Those things, they don't have a price tag, and they're worth more than $15,000, worth more than any amount Thompson could offer. After Henrik left, Eli walked out to the corral. Lucky came over immediately, and Eli opened the gate, stepped inside. The foal followed him, curious about what they were doing. Eli sat down in the grass, and Lucky settled beside him, resting his head on Eli's leg the way he'd done since the beginning. I could have taken that money, Eli told him quietly. Could have set us both up better. But then you'd belong to him, not me. You'd be in some fancy operation being groomed for breeding, treated like an investment instead of what? Family. Was that what Lucky had become? The thought should have seemed ridiculous, but it didn't. This small creature had changed everything, had pulled Eli back into the world, back into connection, back into caring about something beyond his own survival. Lucky had given him purpose when he'd thought he had none left, had reminded him that life was still worth living, still worth fighting for. You're mine, Eli said, his hand on Lucky's warm neck. Not because I own you, but because your mother chose me, because we chose each other, and that's worth more than any amount of money Thompson or anyone else could offer. Lucky's only response was to breathe, steady and content, trusting completely in the man who'd become his world. And Eli sat there as the sun set, as the temperature dropped, as the stars started appearing overhead, and felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the empty kind that came from having nothing to lose, but the full kind that came from having something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. He thought about Thanksgiving, about seeing Thomas and meeting Sarah and the kids, about trying to explain who he'd become in the years they hadn't spoken. Maybe he didn't need to explain it. Maybe Lucky would do that for him, would show Thomas that Eli had finally found something worth caring about more than his own pain, that he'd finally stopped running and started building something that mattered. The temperature kept dropping, and eventually Eli stood, his old bones protesting the cold. He led Lucky into the barn, made sure he had fresh water and hay, checked the blankets he'd hung for insulation. The foal settled into his stall, already drowsy, and Eli stood there for a moment just watching. We're going to be all right, he said quietly. The same words he'd been saying since the beginning, but meaning them more each time. Both of us, whatever comes, we'll face it together. Lucky's ears flicked toward him, acknowledging the words even in his drowsiness. And Eli walked back to his cabin, to his simple life that had somehow become complicated and rich and full in ways he never expected, and felt grateful for every bit of it. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Doc Hendricks came for his weekly checkup on Lucky, but this time his expression was serious before he even examined the foal. He carried a folder under his arm, and when Eli saw it, something in his gut tightened. What's wrong? Eli asked. Let me look at Lucky first. Then we'll talk. Doc's examination was thorough, more thorough than usual. He spent extra time on Lucky's eyes, his joints, his overall conformation. The foal stood patiently, used to these visits now, trusting Doc the way he trusted Eli. When the veterinarian finally straightened up, he was quiet for a long moment. "He's healthy," Doc said. "I want you to know that first. Whatever I'm about to tell you doesn't change that he's a strong, well-adjusted foal who's thriving under your care." But Doc opened the folder. Inside were papers, official-looking documents, breeding records, veterinary reports. After Thompson came by last time, making that offer, I got curious. Something about his insistence didn't sit right. So I did some research, called in some favors with people I know in the registry. Eli, that mare, the one who came to your fence, she wasn't just valuable. She was extraordinary. Eli felt his world starting to shift, the ground beneath him suddenly less solid. "What do you mean?" Her registered name was Desert's Last Hope, champion cutting horse, undefeated in her competitive years. Retired to breeding at Thompson's ranch 5 years ago. Every foal she's produced has sold for between $20,000 and $30,000. Some have gone on to win championships of their own. Doc paused, making sure Eli was following. "Thompson told you Lucky was worth money. He didn't tell you how much. At auction, with that bloodline trained properly, Lucky could bring in $50,000. Maybe more. The number hung in the air between them, impossible and real all at once. $50,000. Eli looked at Lucky, who was nosing at some hay, completely unaware that he represented more money than Eli had seen in his entire life. "There's more," Doc said quietly. "And this is the part that's going to be hard to hear. The fire that injured the mare, it wasn't natural. Thompson Ranch had a barn fire 6 weeks ago. Started from faulty wiring, investigation report says. But here's the thing, Desert's Last Hope was supposed to be in that barn. She was scheduled for a breeding session that night. According to the records, she and Lucky should have both died in that fire. Eli's mind was racing, trying to piece it together. But she got out, more than that. According to the fire report, all the stall doors in that barn were closed and locked for the night. Standard procedure. But somehow, she got her door open. And she didn't just run, she went back into the fire. Eli, there were 3 other horses in that barn. Young ones not as valuable. The firefighters found their bodies. They died from smoke inhalation, couldn't get out of their locked stalls. The weight of what Doc was saying settled onto Eli's shoulders like snow. She tried to save them. The burns on her, they weren't from escaping. They were from going back. She tried, and when she couldn't open those doors, when she realized they were trapped, she saved the one thing she could. Her foal. She was pregnant, already in early labor from the stress and fear, and she ran. Made it miles through rough country, injured and giving birth until she found someone she knew would help. Eli's throat was tight. She was looking for help, not just for her foal, but for all of them. And when she couldn't save the others, she made sure Lucky would survive. Doc nodded slowly. Thompson's insurance paid out on those horses. A significant amount. And legally, Lucky is still his property, the foal of a registered mare from his breeding program. He has papers, documentation, everything that would stand up in court. Why hasn't he taken me to court then? If Lucky's legally his, because I asked around about that too. And here's where it gets interesting. Thompson's insurance company is investigating the fire. There are questions about how it started, whether proper safety protocols were followed, whether the horses should have been locked in at all. If it comes out that Thompson or his staff was negligent, that those horses died because of poor management, he could be liable for much more than the insurance paid out. He could lose his breeding license, face legal action from other horse owners who bored with him. Eli was starting to understand. So he wants Lucky back quietly. He wants Lucky back quietly, and he wants you to think he's doing you a favor by offering money for what's rightfully his. If this goes public, if people find out that the foal of his most valuable mare survived because the mare sacrificed herself, that other horses died in that fire while Lucky lived because his mother was heroic and desperate, it looks very bad for Thompson Ranch. Does the town know? About the fire, about the other horses? Some do. It was in the county paper, small mention. Most folks don't connect it to Lucky. They just know you're raising an orphaned foal. Doc looked at Eli directly. "But if Thompson decides to push this, if he files a legal claim, all of it will come out. The full story, the heroism of that mare, the tragedy of those other horses, the questions about whether Thompson's operation is safe." Eli sat down on a hay bale, his legs suddenly unsteady. Everything he'd thought he understood had shifted. The mare hadn't just been looking for someone to take her foal. She'd been looking for someone who would fight for him, protect him, keep him safe from the same system that had let those other horses die. She'd chosen him not just because he was there, but because somehow, in her final moments, she'd known he was someone who would care more about life than money. "Thompson can't let this story get out," Eli said slowly, working through it. "But he also can't just take Lucky without drawing attention to why the foal's here in the first place." "Exactly. So he's been trying to buy your silence without you knowing that's what he's buying. That 15,000 he offered. It's nothing compared to what Lucky's actually worth, but it would have given him legal ownership without any questions asked. You'd sign papers saying you sold the foal willingly, and that would be the end of it. And now that I've refused, now he has to decide whether pushing this legally is worth the risk of the full story coming out. Whether having Lucky back is worth the potential damage to his reputation and business." Eli looked at the foal, who had finished with his hay and was now standing near the stall door, waiting for attention. Lucky nickered when he saw Eli looking, that sound of recognition and affection that had become the best part of Eli's days. "I don't care what he's worth," Eli said quietly. "I don't care about the bloodline or the money or any of it. That mare trusted me. She brought me her son because she knew I'd do right by him. And I'm not giving him up. Not for 15,000, not for 50,000, not for anything Thompson can offer or threaten." Doc was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was hoping you'd say that. Because I think this is bigger than just you and Lucky now. This is about whether we let people like Thompson value life only in terms of money and convenience, or whether we stand up and say some things matter more than profit. What do I need to do? First, I'm going to write up a full veterinary report documenting Lucky's health, his development, how well he's thriving under your care. That establishes that he's better off here than he would be at Thompson Ranch. Second, I'm going to reach out to some colleagues, people I know who work in animal welfare and breeding ethics. They need to know what happened in that fire, need to ask questions about how Thompson's operation is run. And third," Doc paused, his expression serious. "Third, you need to be prepared for Thompson to escalate this. He's going to realize soon that the quiet approach isn't working. When that happens, he might come at you with lawyers, with legal claims, with pressure you're not equipped to handle alone." "I've got the town," Eli said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "They've been helping me since the beginning. They won't stop now." "No," Doc agreed. "They won't. But Eli, you need to understand what you're taking on. This isn't just about keeping a foal anymore. This is about standing up against someone with money and power and resources. It's about fighting for something you believe in, even when the odds are against you. Are you ready for that?" Eli thought about the question. A month ago, he would have said no. A month ago, he would have walked away from anything that required fighting, risking, caring enough to stand his ground. But that was before Lucky, before a dying mare had looked into his eyes and trusted him with everything that mattered to her. "I'm ready," Eli said. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready," Doc nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I think Lucky's gonna need you to be." After Doc left, Eli stood in the barn, processing everything he'd learned. The mare hadn't just been valuable, she'd been a champion. The fire hadn't just been tragic, it had been negligent. Lucky wasn't just special, he was the son of a hero. The last gift of a mother who'd risked everything to save not just her own foal, but others who were trapped and helpless. And Thompson had been trying to buy him back, to hide the evidence of his failures, to erase the story of the mare's courage so it wouldn't damage his business and reputation. Eli walked into Lucky's stall and sat down in the straw. The foal came over immediately, curious, and settled beside him. Eli put his hand on Lucky's neck, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat, the warmth of life that had almost been extinguished before it even had a chance to begin. Your mother was a hero, Eli told him quietly. She tried to save everyone, and when she couldn't, she made sure you'd survive. She brought you to me because she trusted I'd fight for you the way she did for all of them. And I will. I promise you that. Thompson can bring his lawyers, his money, his power, doesn't matter. You're staying right here. You're home. Lucky's response was to rest his head on Eli's shoulder, trusting completely, and Eli felt the weight of his promise settle into his bones. This wasn't just about keeping a foal anymore. This was about honoring the sacrifice of a mare who died trying to save the helpless. This was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when the odds were against him. This was about being the kind of person his father had hoped he'd be when he'd given him that watch and told him not to waste time on regrets. Eli had wasted decades, but maybe finally he'd found something worth spending his time on, something worth fighting for. Something worth being brave for, and as he sat there with Lucky beside him, with the barn quiet around them, and the weight of what was coming hanging in the air, Eli Boone felt more certain than he had in years. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was standing his ground, and he wasn't standing alone. The legal papers arrived 3 days after Eli's conversation with Doc Hendricks. A courier delivered them personally, watched Eli sign for the envelope, and drove away without a word. Inside were 10 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message. Jack Thompson was claiming ownership of Lucky, based on breeding registration, demanding the foal be returned within 7 days, and threatening legal action if Eli refused to comply. Eli read the papers twice, sitting at his kitchen table with his cold coffee, then folded them carefully and set them aside. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. For the first time in decades, he knew exactly what he was fighting for and why it mattered. He drove to town and went straight to Doc Hendricks's office. The old veterinarian read through the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. "He's serious," Doc said. "This isn't a threat anymore. This is a legal claim. He's got a lawyer, proper documentation, everything lined up. What do I need to do?" "You need a lawyer of your own, and that's going to cost money you don't have." Doc was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Unless we make this about more than just you and Thompson. Unless we make this about the town." By evening, word had spread the way it always did in Redemption, quietly at first, then gathering speed. Eli found himself sitting in the back room of the Silver Spur Saloon, surrounded by people he'd barely known 2 months ago, but who now felt like something close to family. Marlene had closed the bar early and set up chairs. Hendrick was there, and Doc and Sarah Chen, the teacher. Others too, ranchers and shopkeepers, people who'd heard about Lucky, people who'd seen what caring for the foal had done to change Eli. "Thompson's trying to take Lucky," Doc explained to the gathered group. "Claims legal ownership based on breeding registration. He's got documentation lawyer, everything proper on paper. But Eli's been raising him," Sarah said. "Lucky wouldn't have survived without him. That doesn't matter in court, not legally. Thompson has papers proving the mare was his property, which makes the foal his property. Unless we can prove that Eli has a stronger claim, how do we do that?" This from a rancher named Bill Morris, a man Eli had nodded to a few times, but never really talked to. Doc pulled out the folder he'd compiled. "We tell the truth about what happened. About the fire at Thompson Ranch, about the other horses that died, about the mare's heroism. We make this about more than just ownership. We make it about whether we're going to let negligence and profit matter more than doing what's right." Marlene leaned forward. "But won't that just make Thompson fight harder? If his reputation's on the line?" "Maybe," Doc admitted. "But it also puts pressure on him. The breeding community takes animal welfare seriously. If the full story comes out, if people start asking questions about how that fire happened and why those horses died, Thompson could face consequences beyond just losing Lucky. He could lose business, breeding contracts, his reputation in the industry. So we're threatening him," Hendrick said slowly. "Threatening to expose what happened unless he backs off. We're promising to tell the truth," Doc corrected. "There's a difference. We're not lying or exaggerating. We're just making sure everyone knows the whole story. Not just the version Thompson wants them to know. Eli had been quiet through all of this, listening to people strategize about his life, about Lucky's future. Finally, he spoke up. I don't want to destroy Thompson's business. I just want to keep Lucky. The mare chose me for a reason. I made her a promise, and I intend to keep it. But I don't want this to become a war where everybody loses. Sometimes war's unavoidable, Bill Morris said gruffly. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's costly. My grandfather fought in World War II. Used to tell me the hardest thing wasn't being brave in battle. It was deciding the fight was worth having in the first place. Sounds like you've already made that decision, Eli. I have. But I need to know, all of you helping me, standing with me, you understand what you're risking? Thompson's a powerful man. He could make things difficult for people in this town if he wanted to. Let him try, Marlene said firmly. This town survived worse than Jack Thompson's hurt feelings. And besides, this isn't just about Lucky anymore. This is about whether we're the kind of community that stands up for what's right, or the kind that lets money and power decide everything. Sarah nodded. My students know about Lucky. They visited him, watched Eli care for him. This has been an education in responsibility, in caring for something vulnerable. If we let Thompson take Lucky just because he has papers and lawyers, what does that teach those children? That kindness doesn't matter. That promises can be broken if someone with more money decides they should be. The room was quiet for a moment, and then Henrik spoke. My grandfather built his store on the principle that community matters more than profit, that we take care of our own. Eli's one of our own now, whether he planned on it or not. We stand with him, others murmured agreement. Eli felt something in his chest tighten, gratitude and humility, and the weight of people's faith in him. These were folks with their own problems, their own struggles, and they were willing to stand beside him in a fight that wasn't theirs. Thank you, he said quietly. All of you. I'm not good with words. But this means everything. Doc laid out the plan. He would contact colleagues in the breeding community, quietly let them know about the fire investigation, the questions about animal welfare at Thompson Ranch. Sarah would reach out to the local paper, see if they'd be interested in a human interest story about a man raising an orphaned foal against all odds. Marlene would talk to people, spread the word about what was really happening, make sure the town knew the truth. And Henrik would help Eli find a lawyer, someone who might take the case pro bono or at reduced cost, given the circumstances. What about Thompson? Eli asked. What do I tell him when that 7-day deadline hits? You tell him the truth, Doc said. That Lucky's staying with you. That you're prepared to fight this in court if necessary. And you let him know, politely but firmly, that if this goes to court, the full story will come out. Everything about the fire, about the mare's heroism, about those other horses. You give him a chance to walk away with his reputation intact. But you make it clear you're not backing down. The meeting broke up late, people heading home through the cold November night. Eli stayed behind to help Marlene clean up, stacking chairs in silence. You scared? Marlene asked as they worked. Terrified, Eli admitted. Thompson's got resources I don't have. Experience with legal fights. Money for lawyers. But you've got something he doesn't. You've got a town that believes in you. And you've got the truth on your side. Marlene paused, then added, You've changed since Lucky came into your life, Eli. You know that? I know. That mare, she saw something in you that you'd forgotten was there. She saw someone worth trusting with the most precious thing she had. Don't lose sight of that when things get hard. Don't forget who you've become. Eli drove home through the dark, his headlights cutting through the November cold. When he got to his place, he went straight to the barn. Lucky was awake, waiting for him the way he always seemed to know when Eli needed him most. The foal nickered in greeting, and Eli let himself into the stall. Settling down in the straw. We've got a fight ahead, he told Lucky. Thompson's coming with lawyers and papers and everything legal on his side. But we've got the truth. We've got people who believe in us, and we've got each other. He stroked Lucky's neck, feeling the warm, steady life beneath his hand. Your mother fought for you, gave everything she had to make sure you'd survive. I'm not going to let that sacrifice be for nothing. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, you're staying here. This is your home." Lucky rested his head on Eli's shoulder, that gesture of complete trust, and Eli sat there in the quiet barn, gathering his strength for what was coming. The next morning, he wrote the letter himself, carefully worded, respectful but firm. He explained that Lucky was thriving under his care, that the foal had bonded with him and the community, that he was prepared to contest any legal claim. He mentioned, casually but clearly, that if the matter went to court, the full circumstances of how Lucky came to be in his care would necessarily become public record, including the fire, the other horses, the mare's heroism. He gave Thompson a choice: walk away and let Lucky stay where he was happy and healthy, or fight a legal battle that would cost them both far more than any foal was worth. He mailed the letter that afternoon, then came home and waited. 2 days before Thanksgiving, his brother Thomas called. Eli had finally given him the number for the general store, where Henrik took messages. Thomas's voice was tentative, careful, like he was talking to someone who might spook. "Eli, got your message. Just wanted to confirm you're still coming for Thanksgiving." Eli had almost forgotten. Thanksgiving, family, a different kind of confrontation, a different kind of vulnerability. "I don't know if I should," he said honestly. "Things here are complicated. There's a situation with Lucky. The foal you told me about? Yeah, owner's trying to take him back. Legal fight brewing. I should probably stay here, deal with it." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Or you could come here, spend Thanksgiving with family, and go back to face whatever's coming with your strength renewed. Eli, you've been alone for a long time. Maybe you've forgotten how it feels to have people on your side who aren't going anywhere. Come, Sarah wants to meet you. The kids want to meet their uncle. And honestly, I've missed you. More than I let myself admit until recently." Eli felt his throat tighten. "I don't know if I'm the kind of uncle they should meet. Don't know if you're a man who's raised an orphaned foal alone, because you made a promise to a dying horse. You're a man a whole town is willing to fight for. I'd say that's exactly the kind of uncle they should meet. Come, Eli, let us be family again." After he hung up, Eli stood in the store, Henrik watching him quietly from behind the counter. "You going?" Henrik asked. "I think I am. Just for 2 days. Marlene said she'd look after Lucky while I'm gone. Doc will check in too. Good. Man needs family, especially when he's facing a fight." Henrik smiled. "Besides, maybe your brother and his family can remind you what you're really fighting for. Not just Lucky, but the chance to be part of something again. The chance to have connections that matter." That evening, Eli packed a small bag, the first time he'd packed to go somewhere in years. He fed Lucky, made sure the foal had everything he needed, and explained to him in a way that probably made no sense, but felt necessary, that he'd be gone for a couple days. "Marlene's going to take care of you," he told Lucky. "Doc will check in, and I'll be back before you know it. Promise." Lucky seemed to sense something was different, stayed closer than usual, and when Eli finally left the barn, the foal called after him, with that heartbreaking sound that still got to him every time. Eli stood at his cabin door, looking back at the barn, at the life he'd built in just a few short weeks, and felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The fight with Thompson, the trip to see family, the uncertainty of what would happen when the 7 days were up, and Thompson realized Eli wasn't backing down. But underneath the fear and doubt was something else, something new and unfamiliar and strong: determination, purpose, the absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing, even if it was the hard thing. His father's watch sat on the shelf, keeping perfect time, measuring out moments that now mattered. Time he wasn't wasting anymore. Time he was spending on things that would outlast him, on promises kept, on lives saved, on connections that would endure long after he was gone. He picked up his bag, locked the cabin, and headed for his truck. Tomorrow he'd drive to Colorado Springs. He'd meet his brother's family. He'd try to be the kind of uncle and brother they deserved. And then he'd come back to redemption and face whatever Thompson had in store. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Eli Boone wasn't just surviving. He was living, really truly living, and whatever came next, that was worth everything. Thanksgiving at Thomas's house was everything Eli had forgotten family could be. Sarah was warm and welcoming, the kind of woman who made you feel at home before you'd even taken off your coat. The kids, Emma, 19 and studying veterinary medicine, Jake, 16 and quiet but curious, and Lily, 12 and full of questions, treated him like he'd always been part of their lives instead of a stranger who'd been absent for a decade. They sat around a table laden with food, and Thomas said grace, something Eli hadn't heard in years, thanking God for family reunited, for second chances, for the blessings they sometimes didn't see until they almost lost them. When he finished, he looked at Eli with eyes that were suspiciously bright, and Eli had to look away before his own eyes betrayed him. Over dinner, Lily asked about Lucky, and Eli found himself telling the story. Not just the facts, but the feeling of it. The mare appearing at his fence, the trust in her eyes, the weight of the promise he'd made. Emma leaned forward, intent, and when he finished, she said, "That's why I want to be a vet. For moments like that, when you can make a difference between life and death." "Your uncle's doing that now," Sarah said quietly. "Without any training, without any preparation. Just doing what's right because it needs doing." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Eli and Thomas sat on the back porch with coffee, the Colorado cold sharp and clean. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas said, "I'm sorry for the fight we had. For the years we lost, I'm sorry too. Don't even remember what we were fighting about. Dad's funeral. How to handle his estate. You wanted to sell everything, move on. I wanted to keep it, honor his memory. We both thought we were right, and neither of us would back down. I was running," Eli said quietly, "from the pain of losing him. From the expectations of being the older brother who should have had his life together. From everything. Easier to sell and move on than to face what I'd made of my life up to that point. And now I've stopped running. Or I'm trying to. Lucky, that foal, he's teaching me what Dad tried to teach me. That some things are worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "The fight you're facing with Thompson, you know it could get ugly." "I know. You also know you don't have to face it alone. Sarah and we could help. Financially if you need it. Or just being there. Being family again." Eli felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen for too long. "I'd like that," he said, his voice rough. "I'd like having family again." They sat in comfortable silence, and for the first time in a decade, Eli felt like he belonged somewhere. Not just in redemption with Lucky and the town that had claimed him, but here too, with blood family who'd been waiting for him to stop running long enough to come home. He drove back to Redemption the day after Thanksgiving, his truck loaded with leftovers Sarah had insisted he take. The 4-hour drive gave him time to think, to prepare himself for whatever was waiting. As he pulled up to his place, he saw Marlene's car parked by the barn and felt a spike of alarm. She met him halfway to the barn, her face serious. "Eli, Lucky's fine. I want you to know that first. But Thompson came by yesterday. Had some people with him. Asked to see Lucky, take some photos. I told him he'd need your permission, but he got pushy. Said he had a right, that the foal was his property. I stood my ground, wouldn't let him near the barn. He left, but Eli, he's not going to wait much longer. That 7-day deadline you gave him in your letter, it's up tomorrow." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then I guess we'll see what he does. Doc wants you to call him as soon as you're back. Said something about getting statements from everyone who's helped with Lucky, building a case for why the foal's better off here." Eli went to the barn first. Lucky was standing at his stall door, ears pricked forward, and when he saw Eli, he nickered loud and insistent, the sound of someone who'd been worried, who'd been waiting, who was relieved beyond measure that his person had come back. Eli let himself into the stall, and Lucky pushed against him hard, demanding attention, needing the reassurance of touch and presence. "Missed you too," Eli said, his hands on Lucky's neck, feeling the strong, healthy life beneath them. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we face it together." He called Doc from the store, and the old veterinarian's voice was urgent. "Thompson's filed an emergency petition with the county court. Wants a hearing set for next week. claims you're an unfit caretaker, that Lucky's at risk, that the delay in returning the foal constitutes theft. It's aggressive, Eli, more aggressive than I expected. What do we do? I've got a lawyer willing to take your case. Amanda Torres. She specializes in animal welfare law. She's driving up from Denver tomorrow to meet with you. But Eli, she needs to know you're committed to this, that you understand it could get expensive, could take months, could cost you more than just money. She needs to know you're not going to back down halfway through. I won't back down, not now, not ever. That evening, as the sun set over the high desert, Eli stood at his fence line, the same place the mare had appeared all those weeks ago. He thought about her final act, the trust she'd shown, the sacrifice she'd made. He thought about Lucky, growing stronger every day, becoming the horse he was meant to be. He thought about the town that had rallied around him, the family that had welcomed him back, the person he was becoming, someone who stood his ground, who kept his promises, who believed that some things were worth more than their price in dollars. Thompson wanted a fight? Then Eli would give him one. Not with anger or hatred, but with the quiet determination of a man who'd finally found something worth protecting, something worth being brave for. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of coming winter. Eli turned back toward the barn, toward Lucky, toward the life he'd built from nothing more than a promise and a purpose, and he was ready for whatever came next. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in the county courthouse. A 2-hour drive from Redemption. Amanda Torres arrived Monday afternoon, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a direct manner that Eli appreciated. She spent 3 hours with him, going through everything, taking notes, asking questions that made him think harder about what had happened and why it mattered. "The law's not on your side," she said bluntly. "Thompson has documentation proving the mare was his property. That makes Lucky his property, legally speaking. But the law isn't always the final word. Judges have discretion, especially in cases involving animal welfare. What we need to prove is that Lucky's best interests are served by staying with you, that Thompson's negligence in the fire makes him an unfit owner, that the mare's choice, desperate as it was, meant something. Can we prove all that? We can try. Doc Hendricks has statements from fire investigators showing safety violations at Thompson's ranch. We have testimony from you about the mare's condition, her deliberate choice. We have statements from the town about Lucky's health and development under your care. It's not ironclad, but it's something. Tuesday morning, Eli put on the only suit he owned, decades old, a little tight in the shoulders, but clean and pressed. Thomas had driven up the night before and was going with him, along with Doc Hendricks, Marlene, Henrik, and half a dozen others from town. Sarah Chen had arranged for a bus to bring some of her students who'd visited Lucky, wanting the judge to see the impact the foal had on the community. The courthouse was small, formal, intimidating in the way all official buildings were to someone like Eli, who'd spent most of his life avoiding such places. Thompson was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Cheyenne who looked expensive and confident. Thompson himself was composed, his expression somewhere between irritated and determined. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Hendricks, no relation to Doc, but they knew each other. She listened as Thompson's lawyer laid out the case: registered mare, documented breeding, legal ownership, the foal's significant value, Eli's refusal to return what was rightfully Thompson's property. Then Amanda stood and told a different story. She spoke of the fire, of the safety violations, of 3 horses that had died while locked in their stalls. She spoke of a mare so desperate to save her foal that she'd traveled miles while injured and in labor to find someone who would help. She spoke of Eli, a man with no resources, no training, no experience raising newborn foals, who'd taken on an impossible task because he'd made a promise to a dying animal. "Your Honor," Amanda said, her voice carrying through the quiet courtroom, "this case isn't really about property rights or breeding documentation. It's about whether we value life more than money, whether we believe that animals make choices that matter, whether we think the mare's final act, her trust in Mr. Boone, should be honored or dismissed as the random behavior of a dying animal. Thompson's lawyer stood. Your Honor, Ms. Torres is trying to turn this into an emotional appeal instead of a legal matter. The law is clear. The law is clear, Judge Hendricks interrupted, but it's not always complete. I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes the letter of the law and the spirit of justice don't align perfectly. That's why judges exist, to use discretion when the situation warrants it. She looked at Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I've read the fire investigation report. I've seen the citations for safety violations. I'm troubled by the circumstances that led to this foal being in Mr. Boone's care in the first place. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, those violations have been addressed. My operation is fully compliant now. After 3 horses died and a valuable mare sacrificed herself to save her foal. The judge's voice was sharp. I'm not impressed by compliance that comes after tragedy. Mr. Thompson, I'm looking for a pattern of care that prevents tragedy in the first place. She turned to Eli. Mr. Boone, stand up, please. Eli stood, his heart pounding, acutely aware of everyone watching him. You've raised this foal for how long now? 8 weeks, Your Honor. And you've done it alone. No professional help? Doc Hendricks has helped. And the town. But yes, ma'am, mostly alone. Why? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything. Eli thought about the mare's eyes, about Lucky's trust, about the person he'd become in these past weeks. Because I made a promise, he said quietly. That mare looked at me, and she trusted me with the most precious thing she had. I can't break that trust. Not for money, not for convenience, not for anything. Lucky's not property to me. He's family. He's the reason I remember what it feels like to have something worth living for. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hendricks studied him for a long moment, then looked at the papers in front of her. Mr. Thompson, I'm troubled by your operation's safety record. I'm troubled by the circumstances of this case, and I'm impressed by what Mr. Boone has accomplished with limited resources and no formal training. She paused. However, the law does support your claim of ownership. The mare was your registered property, which makes the foal legally yours as well. Eli felt his stomach drop. Beside him, Amanda tensed. But, the judge continued, I'm not convinced that returning the foal to your care is in the animal's best interest. Therefore, I'm issuing a temporary custody order. Lucky will remain with Mr. Boone for the next 6 months, during which time Mr. Thompson will undergo a compliance review of his breeding operation. If at the end of 6 months Mr. Thompson's operation passes inspection and demonstrates proper animal welfare standards, we'll revisit the question of permanent custody. If not, Mr. Boone will have the opportunity to file for permanent legal guardianship. Thompson stood abruptly. Your Honor, that's my ruling, Mr. Thompson. You have the option to appeal, of course. But I'd suggest you spend your energy improving your operation rather than fighting a battle that's not going to win you any friends in the breeding community. She looked at Eli. Mr. Boone, you'll need to maintain detailed records of Lucky's care, health, development. Doc Hendricks can help with that. 6 months from now, we'll see where things stand. She brought down her gavel, and the hearing was over. Outside the courthouse, Eli stood in the cold December air, surrounded by people from Redemption, and tried to process what had just happened. Not a victory exactly, not yet, but time, a chance. 6 months to prove that Lucky belonged with him, that the mare's choice had been right. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. You did good in there. She didn't give me custody, just delayed the decision. She gave you time to prove yourself. That's more than most people get. Use it well. On the drive back to Redemption, Eli sat in silence, watching the winter landscape roll past. 6 months. It felt like both forever and no time at all. In 6 months, Lucky would be nearly a year old, transitioning from foal to young horse. In 6 months, Thompson could fix his operation, pass inspection, come back stronger. Or in 6 months, Eli could prove beyond doubt that Lucky was thriving, that the bond between them mattered, that some things were more important than papers and pedigrees. When he got home, Lucky was waiting at the fence, and the moment Eli approached, The young horse whinnied loud and clear, not the high cry of a foal anymore, but something deeper, stronger. Eli climbed the fence, and Lucky came to him immediately, pushing against him. And Eli wrapped his arms around the strong neck and let himself feel the relief, the gratitude, the love for this creature who'd changed his life completely. "We've got 6 months," he told Lucky. 6 months to prove we belong together, and we're going to make every single day count." As the sun set over the high desert, Eli Boone stood with the foal who'd become his purpose, his family, his reason for finally choosing to live instead of just exist. The fight wasn't over, but he'd won the first battle. And that was enough for now. 6 months passed like water, finding its course, sometimes slow and meandering, sometimes rushing forward with purpose. Winter gave way to early spring, and Lucky grew from a foal into a young horse with strong legs and a curious spirit. Eli documented everything, feeding schedules, health checks, training progress. Doc Hendricks came by weekly, not just to examine Lucky, but to sit on the porch and talk about life, about purpose, about the strange ways grace found people when they least expected it. Thompson never came back. His operation underwent the compliance review, and according to Doc's contacts in the breeding community, he'd failed the inspection twice before finally making the necessary changes. Word had spread about the fire, about the mare's heroism, about the horses that had died. His reputation had taken a hit, and several clients had moved their breeding stock elsewhere. The fight for Lucky had cost Thompson more than just the foal. It had cost him the one thing he'd valued most, his standing in the industry. In April, Eli received a letter from Thompson's lawyer. Brief and formal, it stated that Mr. Thompson was withdrawing his claim to the foal and releasing all ownership rights. There was no apology, no explanation, just a legal document that made Lucky officially, permanently Eli's that evening. Eli gathered the town in the Silver Spur. Marlene poured drinks, and Eli stood before the people who'd become his community, his family, and tried to find words adequate to what he was feeling. "I came here 8 months ago to die quietly," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not all at once, but slowly, just letting time run out without fighting it, without caring much about what happened next. Then a dying mare showed up at my fence and gave me a reason to care again, gave me something that needed me, something worth fighting for. But it wasn't just the mare, and it wasn't just Lucky. It was all of you." He looked around the room, at Doc, who'd given his expertise freely, at Marlene, who'd brought food and friendship, at Henrik, who'd made sure supplies were never a problem, at Sarah Chen and her students, who'd shown him that what he was doing mattered beyond just himself and Lucky, at Thomas, who'd driven up from Colorado Springs to be here for this moment, to stand with his brother the way family should. You made me part of something when I'd spent years running from exactly that. You showed me that being needed isn't a burden, it's a gift. That community isn't something that traps you. It's something that sets you free to be who you're supposed to be." Eli paused, his throat tight. "Lucky's mine now, legally, officially, permanently. But he was always mine, really, just like I was always yours. I just needed time to realize it." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Eli stood there, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance of people who'd claimed him without permission and refused to let him go. That night, back at his place, Eli stood at the same fence line where the mare had appeared all those months ago. Lucky was in the corral, no longer the fragile creature who couldn't stand without help, but a strong young horse who could run and jump and play. In the fading light, the white star on his forehead seemed to glow, a marker of how special he was, how much his mother had sacrificed to give him life. Eli thought about the mare often, wondered if she'd known what she was doing when she brought her foal to him, wondered if she'd somehow sensed that he needed saving as much as Lucky did. Animals knew things people forgot, about character, about trust, about who could be counted on when everything else fell away. "Thank you," Eli said quietly to the memory of her, to the spirit of courage and love that had driven her to make that impossible journey. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me a reason to keep going, for showing me I still had something to give. Lucky lifted his head at the sound of Eli's voice, ears pricked forward and nickered in response. The young horse trotted over to the fence, and Eli climbed through, settling down in the grass. Lucky stood beside him, occasionally lowering his head to graze, occasionally just standing close, the easy companionship of two beings who'd saved each other. Inside the cabin, on the shelf above the stove, his father's watch kept perfect time, time that wasn't being wasted anymore. Time spent on promises kept, on life lived with purpose, on connections that would endure. His father had told him not to waste time on regrets, and finally, Eli understood what that meant. It meant spending your days on things that mattered, on love and responsibility, and showing up for the people and creatures who needed you. The stars came out overhead, bright and clear in the high desert sky. Eli sat with Lucky in the gathering dark, feeling the cold air, the solid ground beneath him, the warm presence of a horse who'd become family. He thought about how far he'd come from that first foggy morning, from the moment of decision that had changed everything. Sometimes the most broken souls find each other in the most unexpected ways. An aging cowboy with nothing left but regrets, and a dying mare who knew her time had come. In the space between despair and hope, between endings and beginnings, something incredible had happened. Not just survival, but transformation. Not just life, but purpose. Lucky settled down beside him, resting his great head on Eli's shoulder with complete trust. And Eli Boone, 64 years old, no longer alone, no longer running, finally felt like he'd come home. The mare had cried and given her foal to a poor cowboy. And the incredible thing that happened: two broken souls had found each other and become whole. A forgotten man had found purpose. A community had found its heart. And a foal, who should have died instead, became a symbol of hope, of redemption, of the power of promises kept and trust honored. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the bloodlines or the legal battles. It was about love. Simple, profound, transformative love. The kind that asks everything and gives more in return. The kind worth fighting for, worth living for, worth every moment of every day. And as Eli sat under the stars, with Lucky beside him, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not in wandering, not in running, not in keeping himself safe from hurt, but in staying, in caring, in letting himself be loved by a creature who asked for nothing but presence, who gave everything in return, who taught an old cowboy that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. It's never too late to finally come home.